Many people who are concerned about our modern food environment find themselves in search of simple rules. This is why so many fad diets gain a following even when there's very little science behind them. People want easy-to-follow dietary advice, but the human diet is inherently complex. Having said that, there are simple ways of wording sound dietary advice. Here's one of the best examples.
Michael, you use a simple framework for delivering a lot of your advice on how to approach one's relationship with food, and what comes to mind is your kind of mantra: eat food, not too much, mostly plants.
Yeah. Well, coming up with those 7 words, which I'm afraid will be on my gravestone unless I come up with something better soon, is the result of a very long process of examining the science of nutrition. But as I got deeper and deeper and deeper, I realized, actually, the key issue is, are you eating real food, or what I like to call edible food-like substances, which is to say processed foods. And so the phrase eat food, I realized that's really what you need to know to eat well. Eat food, by which I mean real food. But then I realized that isn't quite enough, because we're also eating too many calories. So not too much became part of the mantra. And then lastly, I was like, within the range of foods, is there a class that's better than another class? And one of the things we know is that people who eat lots of plant foods tend to have much better health and better longevity than people who eat a heavy meat diet. So mostly plants. Not all plants. Mostly is, I'm trying to be very reasonable, and although it tends to offend both vegetarians and carnivores when you say mostly plants. So eat food, not too much, mostly plants, is basically, I think, all you need to know. Now, eat food is probably the hardest part of that to understand, because isn't all that stuff in the supermarket food? Well, I would argue it's not, and I would argue a lot of it are relatively new, highly processed, edible food-like substances that really are what gets most people into trouble around eating. They tend to have lots of refined sugars, lots of refined fats, and very little fiber, very little of the antioxidants you find in plants. And basically they were designed for long shelf life, these processed foods. And the way you make a food last longer is you take out what is nutritionally valuable. I'm talking about omega-3 fatty acids, I'm talking about fiber, all these things don't store well. So we've gone down a path of eating a lot of things that shouldn't be dignified with that beautiful word, food.
Replacing the highly processed food in our diets with reasonable amounts of real food, including plenty of plant-based foods, is sound advice for people who want to protect their health. And Pauline's mantra, eat food, not too much, mostly plants. These 7 words can be a helpful guide for anyone who wants to keep it simple when it comes to choosing food. The average person would find it difficult to cook on a regular basis if they had to shop for ingredients every single day. So most people who cook frequently have certain basic ingredients in their kitchen at all times. These basics allow you to pull together a healthy, delicious meal in very little time, even if you happen to get home late from work. There are no hard and fast rules for what these ingredients should be, but whatever they are, they should be ingredients that support the flavors of the foods you enjoy eating, and they should be foods that will last in your kitchen, at least from one shopping trip to the next. In our house, these 6 basic ingredients are olive oil, onions, garlic, lemons, sugar, and salt. With these 6 ingredients on hand, it's not hard to transform just about any fresh food into a meal. These ingredients also allow the cook to correct or customize the flavor of any dish by tweaking its sweetness, saltiness, or acidity until the cook feels it's just right. Having a set of fundamental ingredients on hand can take a lot of the stress out of cooking because it allows us to apply some of the same cooking principles to many different foods.
Pasta. I think whole grain pasta is a terrific choice. I actually happen to like it. Some people can't stand it, but it's gotten a lot better in the last few years, so give it another try if you don't like it. Olive oil is absolutely essential. I always have cans of salmon and tuna. Vinegar is important in many ways. Soy sauce, essential. I marinate a lot of the things that I cook. Lemons do wonderful things for almost everything. And adding a little acid to food just kind of brightens it and, just makes it very special. And then I have a few things in the garden. I always have parsley in the garden, which is kind of a magic ingredient too. And cilantro. And in the summer I have basil.
In many ways, cooking is empowerment. The person stirring the pot usually ends up having the final say over how much fat, sugar, salt, and total calories end up in the foods we eat. Unlike the processed food industry, we have the long-term health of the consumer in mind when we're preparing our own food. By doing the best we can with the resources that are available to each of us, we can optimize our nutritional health and prevent many of the chronic diseases we as a society are fighting in epidemic proportions.
The cooking issue is different for all of us, and we have to kind of make an assessment of where we are with cooking, what's possible, what's not possible, given our lifestyle. But if we share, if we plan, if you keep certain basic things in your pantry and fridge so that even if you haven't had time to stop at the store on the way home or you're out of things, you can still make a good dinner. For example, our default here very often is we always have some cans of wild salmon in the pantry. We always have dried pasta. There's always olive oil and lemon, and there's always frozen spinach. With those three ingredients, the salmon, the pasta, and the frozen spinach, I can make a terrific dinner in 15-20 minutes, and it's very inexpensive. It's nothing glamorous, but it's very satisfying, and everybody in the family enjoys it.
One of the biggest pitfalls of the typical Western diet is the fact that it lacks the amount and variety of plant-based foods that human beings need to protect their long-term health and maintain a healthy weight. The average American consumes less than 2 cups of fruits and vegetables every day, less than half of the recommended daily intake. So, for the majority of people who wish to improve their diets, one of the most important things they can do is to increase their daily consumption of fresh fruits and vegetables. But it's also important that these foods are prepared in a way that supports our health. And that's where knowing how to cook tasty vegetable dishes can be such a powerful skill to have. One of the best ways to start any cooked vegetable dish, or any savory dish for that matter, is to chop and saute onions in a small amount of olive oil. And if you like the flavor, you can add a little bit of garlic as well.
Onions are the basis of so many dishes. And in fact, I think one of the great impediments to cooking is people's dislike of chopping an onion. And you just have to get over that.
Sauteed onions are the first step to an amazing number of meals. From this flavor-rich starting point, you can add chopped veggies like zucchini or spinach with a bit of salt and pepper to make a delicious veggie breakfast omelet. You can make a simple tomato sauce by adding chopped or blended tomatoes and a touch of salt. And you can make a colorful vegetable stir fry with almost any vegetable you happen to have in the fridge. Just chop it up, then flavor with some soy sauce or plum sauce or any other sauce you happen to like. There are some safety precautions involved, like keeping your fingers away from the blade of the knife and stabilizing vegetables by placing them flat surface down while chopping. But in reality, the health risks associated with vegetable chopping are probably far less serious than the health risks associated with not eating them.
And you don't have to eat organic to eat well. The first decision is to eat those fruits and vegetables. And if you can afford organic, great. Some organic foods taste better. They all have less pesticide, and that's important. But it's less important than the fact you're eating fruits and vegetables. Better to eat pesticide-laden fruits and vegetables than none at all.
Establishing a healthy diet that can be maintained over time has to focus on sensible substitutions rather than simple elimination of the foods we like to eat. This is one of the reasons why skipping meals doesn't usually help to maintain a healthy weight, because our bodies will find ways to make up for a perceived deprivation of food. Here's a simple exercise to help you start thinking about healthy substitutions. Go through a typical day's food intake and identify times when you're habitually eating less than desirable foods. For example, the 48-year-old man in our case study usually wound up snacking on potato chips and candy in the evenings. What if that unhealthy snack food were to be replaced with a healthy, satisfying dip and some fresh, crisp veggies? Veggies and hummus are a great snack food substitution that can be found minimally processed in most grocery stores, or it can even be whipped up in minutes from some simple ingredients that you can keep on hand in the kitchen. Even making your own salad dressing instead of buying bottled salad dressing at the store, this is a simple, healthful substitution that can even save some money. A simple vinaigrette can be thrown together in minutes and kept in an airtight container in the fridge for up to a week. Another sensible substitution, if you're craving something crisp and slightly salty, is homemade popcorn, which can be made in a pot or a popcorn maker. An added benefit, you get to control the salt, and if you're using any oil at all, you can control the amount and type of oil that you use. In general, the homemade versions of almost anything you crave will be healthier and probably tastier than the processed version of those foods. Do you crave chicken nuggets? Make them from scratch using organic chicken if you can. The homemade version only requires 6 ingredients: chicken, flour, egg, breadcrumbs, olive oil, and salt to taste. Compare that with the ingredients in fast food chicken nuggets. If you feel like an occasional piece of cake, make it from scratch using eggs, a reasonable amount of sugar, butter, almond flour, and baking powder. A slice of cake like this is almost guaranteed to be more satisfying, and your dessert intake will be tempered because you're making it yourself.
You're not going to make dessert every night if you're cooking yourself, because it's too much damn work. And so there's something about the act of cooking that enforces, without us even being conscious of it, a healthy, wholesome diet. I think it's very hard to get fat on home-cooked food.
For every unhealthy food, there's a healthy home-cooked counterpart, and learning how to prepare these substitutions is one of the keys to long-term weight management and an ongoing celebration of food. A healthy meal begins with assembling a healthy plate, and before you bring anything to that plate, it might be worthwhile to buy a set of smaller dinner plates, cups, and glasses. Interestingly, many hardware stores sell these very inexpensively, but they're harder to find in fancy kitchen stores, mostly because small plates have gone out of style.
One of the reasons we like to obsess about nutrients, and the industry likes to obsess about nutrients, it's the way of distracting us from the quantities of food we're eating. And we are eating more. I mean, the supersizing has made plate sizes bigger, soda sizes are bigger. I mean, the portions from when I was a kid have been doubled, you know. And the bigger the portion, the more you will eat.
So size matters when it comes to your plate. But once you've found a reasonably sized plate, the first step in constructing the meal should be deciding, what is my vegetable component of this meal going to be? We tend to start by thinking about the protein when we're planning a meal. If we can think of the vegetables as the feature, then the entire meal will likely end up being healthier. The plate itself should consist of about 1/2 plant-based food, ideally with a mix of different colored vegetables. Different colored vegetables contain different micronutrients, so eating a variety of them maximizes our nutrient coverage. In general, eating a variety of foods is also beneficial because it minimizes the chances of getting sick from potential contaminants in any one food. The remaining 1/2 of the plate should be equally divided into whole grains and lean, protein-rich foods. These foods can come from animal sources or plant sources, but again, variety is good. Eating chicken every night of the week is almost certainly not the best way to stay healthy or excited about your next meal. Most of the time, the best drink to quench thirst and keep us hydrated and healthy is plain, clean water. The human body is made up of more than 50% water, so don't forget to replace it during mealtime. Drinking water before each meal may even be helpful for weight management. The variations are endless, but getting into the habit of creating a healthy plate, sitting down for meal times, and taking time to enjoy our meals, these are the pearls of wisdom our great-grandmothers wore every day. As the number of regular supermarkets increases, more and more people have access to the basic ingredients they need to make simple, healthy meals.
Another obstacle people erect to cooking is the idea that to cook you must go to the farmer's market and buy all local and organic food, and that's really not the case. The first and key decision, if health is a concern, is moving off of processed food and onto real food. I'm talking about plants and animals in their more or less natural state, or things that are very lightly processed like pasta or flour or things like that. And those things are still in your supermarket. They're mostly on the periphery of the supermarket. And one way to shop is sticking to the perimeter of the store. That historically is where the produce is, where the meat is, where the fish is, and where the dairy is.
When people visit the supermarket to buy perishable items like milk or eggs, the most direct routes to those items will often be stocked with the most heavily processed foods, things like cereals, chips, and sodas. In many countries today, food marketing is a big business. In the US alone, billions of dollars are spent establishing brand loyalty and placing highly processed items at eye level where we can easily reach them. This can make it difficult to leave the supermarket with only the milk and the eggs we intended to buy. For this reason, it's a good idea to make a shopping list before you go to the store, and then try and stick to that list. Going grocery shopping when you're hungry can also dramatically increase the temptation to buy calorie-dense, highly processed foods.
Avoid the center aisles. The center aisles are where the imperishable foods, the foods that are immortal, live. And you know, food is alive and it should eventually die. And a food that doesn't, there's something we should wonder about. It's been over-processed, it's been hyper-processed.
One way to tell if a food is hyper-processed is to look at the number of ingredients listed on the packaging. A food that contains fewer ingredients is almost certainly less processed. Also, if we can recognize the ingredients listed, this almost always means the food is less processed than foods containing ingredients that the average person has never heard of. And remember, foods that don't come with ingredient lists, like fruits and vegetables, are usually the best choices of all. Many people are confused by the nutrition labels they see on packaged foods in the supermarket. Before we talk about some simple tips for reading those labels, it's important to remember that some of the healthiest foods in the store, like fresh fruits and vegetables or a fillet of fish, these foods don't need nutrition labels to tell you they're nutritious. So one simple strategy for eating sensibly is to try as much as possible to avoid foods with nutrition labels, because by definition, these are packaged and more heavily processed than fresh foods. Having said that, since the majority of us eat at least some packaged food items, it's good to know what to look for, especially if you're comparing two packaged items and trying to make an informed decision. Firstly, it's important to keep in mind that the nutrition label may not reflect the contents of the entire package. There's often more than a single serving in one container, and this can be confusing and misleading to many people. I saw a mini loaf of banana bread in a shop the other day and thought, not bad. The sugar, fat, and calories in this are pretty reasonable. Then I saw that there were 5 servings in that mini loaf. Multiplied by 5, the nutrition label didn't look so healthy anymore. Underneath the serving size, we see total calories. This probably isn't the best way to judge whether something is good for you or not, because some foods like nuts and avocados, for example, are high in calories, but also very healthy as long as they're eaten in reasonable amounts. But if weight loss is a goal and you're comparing two cereals, for example, the calories in a packaged food item are something you want to keep an eye on. The next thing to look at, especially if we're comparing breakfast cereals, is the dietary fiber. Dietary fiber is important for maintaining gastrointestinal health, stabilizing blood glucose levels after eating, and delaying the return of hunger. So choosing a cereal that's higher in fiber is usually a sensible thing to do. Next, we want to look at the sugars in the cereal. There's convincing evidence that our modern epidemics of obesity and diabetes are at least partly related to the fact that we tend to eat far too much sugar. To convert the amount of sugar in grams to teaspoons, just divide by 4. You might be alarmed to see that some children's cereals contain 5 or more teaspoons of sugar per serving. Next, we want to look at the total amount of fat and the breakdown of the fat content in the food. In general, the fats in processed foods tend to be less healthy than the fats found in plant foods like avocados or nuts. These are naturally occurring unsaturated fats. Saturated fats like those found in red meats and butter can be eaten in reasonable amounts, and trans fats, which are more commonly found in processed foods, these kinds of fats should be avoided entirely. In fact, legislation in the US was passed in 2015 ordering food manufacturers to stop using trans fats because of the associated increased risk of atherosclerosis and heart disease. Choosing foods with less sodium is also a good idea, given the fact that packaged foods often contain much more added salt than the less processed versions of those foods. Nutrition labels will also often contain a list of vitamins and minerals found in the food, and this can be misleading because added vitamins and minerals don't necessarily mean that the food is healthy, and in fact, some unhealthy foods have added vitamins and minerals because the manufacturers of those foods know that nutrition claims tend to increase sales to the health-conscious consumer. Helping patients use nutrition labels to compare packaged food items is important, but just as important is encouraging them to eat fewer packaged foods and crowd those out with plant-based foods that don't come with nutrition labels. One of the keys to sustaining improvements in the way we eat is the ability to practice moderation in our diets. As a society, we tend to take an all-or-nothing approach to food, eating too much of something or trying to eliminate that food or category of foods altogether. That tendency towards extremes becomes even more obvious when we look at what's happened to the food on the shelves of our local supermarkets. On the one hand, we've supersized everything, and on the other hand, we see claims like fat-free and sugar-free everywhere in the supermarket. And these claims attract us because they're absolute. But if we can master the skill of eating with moderation, then no single food needs to be forbidden. We can eat the foods we enjoy as long as we don't consume too much of them.
How much we eat is a very important question, and how to regulate our appetite or moderate our appetites is very hard for people. We are socialized to eat until we're full. That's not a natural thing, and it's not a universal thing. You know, in France, when you're hungry, you say, j'ai faim, I have hunger. And at the end of the meal, you don't say, I am full, and you don't ask your children, are you full? You say, je n'ai plus faim, I am no longer hungry. That's very different than being stuffed. The moment at which you're no longer hungry is many bites before the time when you're stuffed. And we ask our kids the wrong questions. We say, are you full? We should say, are you satisfied? Are you still hungry? So you see, there are cultural ways and mores and manners that help us deal with quantity in food. So we have to look at things like portion size. We have to look at things like the way we talk about food. Are people really looking for lots of calories when they eat? I think they're looking for lots of food experience, an intense, satisfying food experience. And if you look at the French and many other cultures as well, they get more food experience with less food. And they do that partly by eating more slowly, eating socially, eating better quality food. There is a trade-off between quality and quantity, and the American food system is very much organized around quantity.
And in fact, one of the biggest contributors to the obesity epidemic has been our tendency to consume enormous quantities of low-quality food. This is not to suggest that the foods we eat need to be expensive, but we need to spend our food budget wisely on the foods that will support both good health and enjoyment.
Well, what about having less of the better food and approaching it that way so that every bite is enjoyable? You'll notice, everyone will notice, that whenever you're sitting down to eat, the first bite is the best. And the Chinese have a saying, the banquet is in the first bite. So let's focus on those first few bites, smaller portions of better quality food. And I wrote Food Rules, my book of rules about eating, to examine how different cultures deal with this question of moderation. Many cultures have a rule that basically says stop eating before you're full. The Japanese say hara hachi bu, eat until you're 80% full. That's such a foreign concept to us. But you find this across the board. The Chinese say eat until you're 75% full. In the Quran it says you should eat until you're 2/3 full. Everything but 100%, which is what most of us do.
Next time you're going to eat something, ask yourself a few questions about it. Will this food bring me pleasure, or am I eating it because it's a food that I feel I'm allowed to eat? Eating foods that don't bring you any pleasure is another form of taking in empty calories, because they're empty of enjoyment. The very next question to ask about a food you're considering eating is this: is this food worthy of me? And by this I mean, will this food support me in achieving all of the things I want to achieve in the long run, including good health? If the answer to this question is yes, then the very next question is, how much of this food do I really need to eat to feel satisfied, knowing that I can have it again tomorrow or later this week because I've mastered the art of moderation? Each day should include moderate amounts of food that bring us pleasure. Moderation allows us to live at peace with our food, knowing that subtle variations won't be enough to destabilize a healthy relationship.